I first learned of the masquerade through a battered envelope slipped beneath my door. The parchment was thick and yellowed, the edges curled with age as though it had lain dormant for decades. My name shimmered on the front in dark, swirling ink that smelled faintly of burnt wax. I recall my initial hesitation, no sender's address, no sign of who might have delivered it. But something in the Baroque calligraphy compelled me to lift the flap and extract the contents. Inside lay a single card, bearing an elaborate crest depicting a twin-headed raven. Beneath the crest, in neat copperplate script, were directions to a remote estate shrouded by ancient pines. Half a day's journey by carriage from my humble lodging on the outskirts of the city. The invitation announced a midnight masquerade the following weekend. Urging my attendance with an almost desperate fervor, I scanned the words, enunciating them under my breath, and felt an odd chill. There was no signature, only an austere command to arrive promptly by the 12th stroke of the clock. I might have dismissed the invitation had it not stroked a yearning deep within me. The promise of mystery, of unspoken danger, or perhaps a chance to witness something few others would believe. Tobacco smoke spiraled from my pipe into the flickering lamplight as I turned the card over, searching for clues. A faint, antique odor clung to its surface. Though the wise course might have been to toss the note into the fire and forget it, I realized I could not so easily ignore this lure. There was a fascination in the unknown, a magnetic pull. I decided I would attend if only to satisfy the dreadful curiosity kindling in my heart. On the appointed day, I hired a carriage to convey me across winding roads that grew steadily narrower and more disused with each passing mile. The driver, a gaunt man with sunken cheeks, kept his eyes on the twisting path and rarely spoke. When I tried to make polite conversation, I received a single, ominous comment. "That old mansion ain't had visitors in years. Best watch yourself." His gaze darted to the rearview mirror after those parting words, as though the gloom of the surrounding forest unsettled him. Thick stands of ancient pines crowded close to the road, their branches clawing at the leaden sky. The journey took us well past dusk, and the road ahead vanished into swirling banks of fog. After hours of travel, the mansion finally materialized beyond a tall, wrought iron gate tangled with rust. Weeds had grown thick around the entrance, and the estate grounds lay in a state of ruin. Ivy strangled the broken walls. Statues of grim-faced angels stood listing in the courtyard, and countless windows gaped like hollow, sightless eyes. Despite the building's decrepit condition, golden light flickered within the highest windows, hinting that the invitation's promise of festivity might yet be genuine. The driver halted the carriage and, with a brief nod, refused my coin. He insisted that I keep what I had offered him, muttering something about not wishing to linger. Before I could clarify, he snapped the reins and left me alone at the rusted gate. I forced it open with a groan of metal, then followed a cracked stone path, leading up the double doors. A wave of apprehension washed over me as I set foot on the porch, where dead leaves drifted in the breeze. The front door, despite its battered exterior, swung open smoothly at my touch. Beyond it lay a cavernous foyer lit by trembling candelabras. A hush blanketed the interior, suffused with the stale odor of old wood and dust. Yet I could detect an undercurrent of warmth and music from somewhere deeper inside. Beckoning me toward the heart of the mansion, I ventured through a corridor lined with portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow my every step. Their dour expressions loomed above me, lit by guttering candles on sconces shaped like serpents. The floor creaked under my boots. At last, I reached a grand ballroom whose walls were lacquered in shadow. Here, candles burned in tall stands, and dozens of figures moved in graceful arcs across the floor, accompanied by faint, eerie strains of a violin. Everyone wore masks, some brilliantly plumed, others fashioned as harlequins or grotesque beasts. My own invitation had not included a mask, so I wore a simple black half-make that I had possessed for some years, a relic from a city festival long past. When I made my entrance, I half expected the dancers to pause and greet me, But no one seemed startled by my arrival. Instead, they continued their silent, languid dancing, the faint music swaying them in unison. For a brief moment, an inexplicable sense of being watched made my skin crawl. Then a tall gentleman in a velvet suit stepped away from the swirling dancers and approached me with a polite bow. He wore a silver fox mask whose narrow snout added a certain slyness to his bearing. "You have arrived at last," he said in an oddly lilting voice. "We have been expecting you. Please, join us." He extended a gloved hand to guide me toward the dancers. The hush was unsettling, for I realized the music, while audible, seemed distant and hollow, as if played behind dampened walls. Despite my misgivings, I joined the throng, and so the evening began, a whirling mass of masked strangers gliding across the polished floor, accompanied only by that thin, spectral tune. Yet there was a rarefied grandeur in the way these revelers carried themselves, as though this ball had once been the social pinnacle, and every step now clung to an archaic formality. From time to time, I tried to catch glimpses of faces behind the masks, but each attempt was thwarted. It was as if they noticed my curiosity and subtly turned away. I tried conversation. Often I received polite, succinct replies, but no one offered tangible answers. I asked the tall gentleman if he was the host. He lowered his eyes behind the silver fox mask and gave a wry laugh. "No one is truly the host," he whispered. "We are all guests at this midnight masquerade. Our host is absent, I regret to say." Hours drifted by in a dreamlike haze, and I struggled to keep track of time. The candelabras never seemed to melt beyond a certain point. The half-muted sky through the high windows remained starless and timeless. Eventually, the music waned, replaced by a quiet hush that wrapped itself around the dancers. My feet ached, but I felt compelled to remain, as though leaving unpaid some hidden debt would be calamitous. The tall gentleman reappeared at my side, elegantly flicking dust from his velvet sleeves. "It is nearly midnight," he murmured. "The moment approaches." I glanced around, realizing for the first time how many guests had gathered. They must have numbered close to 50, all masked and arrayed in finery that seemed ill-suited to such a decaying mansion. Yet the flickering candlelight lent an unearthly glow to their attire, rendering each garment shimmering and new. I wondered if the moon had risen, or if starlight might trickle through the ragged roof, but the glass overhead revealed only swirling blackness. The hush settled thicker over the room, as though everyone held their breath. Then, from the far end of the ballroom, a figure stepped into view. A woman clad in a tattered but once grand dress of burgundy silk. She wore a crow mask whose beak curved sharply downward, accentuating the gaunt lines of her face. Though I could not see her eyes, I felt certain she was staring directly at me. She passed among the dancers, trailing a subtle scent of decaying lilies, footsteps whisper-soft on the floor. I heard an intake of breath around me as she paused at the center. The violin music, so eerie and subdued before, vanished altogether. "Midnight," she announced, her voice echoing against the high walls. "At the 12th stroke, we unmask." Something in her words sent an icy shiver through me. Unmask? The invitation said nothing about such a custom, nor had any of the other guests specifically mentioned it. Even so, the masked assembly stood in solemn acceptance, as if this tradition were older than the mansion itself. The woman lifted her gloved hand and pointed at the massive clock at the ballroom's edge. Its pendulum swung with ponderous ticks, each one reverberating like distant thunder. My heart began to pound in time with the heavy strokes. 1, 3, 2, 3. Each tick announced the imminent arrival of midnight. By the 9th stroke, an urgent dread gripped me. I had the inexplicable notion that once the clock finished tolling, something irreparable would occur. Some boundary would be crossed. The masked woman's shoulders rose and fell with each chime. The rest of the guests stood motionless, as though transfixed by the ancient clock. 10. 11. At the 12th stroke, an electric hush seized the air. The woman's hands, delicate yet trembling, lifted the crow mask from her face. In that echoing moment, I glimpsed a visage wan with sorrow, eyes haunted by some nameless affliction. Her lips parted and she exhaled a soft gasp. For an instant she appeared fully alive, trembling in the candlelight as though stepping out of a dream. But then, her shape began to fade. Her features blurred, growing transparent until she vanished altogether. A disbelieving horror swept the room. Even as shock thundered in my mind, I turned to look at the others, only to see them following suit. One by one, the masks were lifted, revealing pale, terrified faces. And in the act of disclosure, each guest flickered like a dying lantern flame and disappeared into thin air. As my eyes darted about, I counted half a dozen vanishings. 10, 12. Soon nearly every masked figure was gone, their presence replaced by faint whispers of air. I stood in the midst of this silent upheaval, not comprehending how such a phenomenon could be. My chest tightened. Then I saw the tall gentleman, the one in the fox mask, giving me a sorrowful look from across the ballroom. Hesitantly, he placed his hands on his mask's edges, as though about to remove it. I dashed toward him, desperate to stop him, to demand an explanation. But even as I reached him, he slipped the fox mask free, his eyes flickering with regret. For the span of a heartbeat, I glimpsed an elegant face, young and handsome, yet marked with a translucent pallor. Then he too was gone, dissolving into the stale air, leaving the silver fox mask to slip from my grasp to the floor. The ballroom was unnervingly empty. Cracked walls and rotting draperies replaced the grandeur that had flickered in the candlelight. All illusions of splendor had dissolved, as if the entire gathering were a memory forced into tangible form. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I realized I stood alone, the only soul left where once there had been a throng of dancers. I gazed around in confusion. The lonely violin music that had accompanied our waltz was silent. The golden radiance that had lit the space was replaced by the guttering flames of splintered torches, revealing heaps of dust and debris. A muffled sound drew my attention. Another figure emerged from behind an overturned table. He wore the mask of an owl, though one eye hole had cracked, as if the plaster was on the verge of crumbling. He looked about wildly, like a cornered animal. When he noticed me, he scurried closer. Fear etched into his every movement. "You haven't removed your mask either," he whispered. I gave a quick shake of my head. My own face remained hidden behind the black half-make I had brought. Something inside me forbade me from removing it. Even though my rational mind scoffed, I could not deny the horrifying truth. Those who unveiled themselves vanished. The owl-maked man clutched my sleeve. "We must leave this place," he urged, voice trembling. "We were never meant to linger. The others, they belong to the house." Dazed, I could only nod. Together we made for the corridor. But it was not as simple as retracing my earlier steps. The house seemed to have shifted in some subtle manner, its hallways twisting at impossible angles. The once grand foyer was now choked with cobwebs. Flickering candles on serpent sconces had burned down to stubs, long since turned cold. Our footsteps echoed ominously through the emptiness. I tried to recall which passage I had taken, but each route looked like a mocking reflection of the last. In one corridor, the paintings were so decayed their subjects were unrecognizable. In another, the floorboards were rotted through, revealing gaping holes into a dark basement below. We pressed on, guided merely by a faint hope that we might stumble upon an exit, yet the derelict mansion refused to surrender its secrets. More than once, we turned a corner only to face a dead end. Dust whirled in our wake. The hush grew ever more claustrophobic, as if a suffocating presence prowled just beyond our sight. The temperature seemed to drop with each step, until our breath made white clouds in the stale air. Suddenly, the owl-maked man halted. He had noticed a faint lantern glow spilling round the edge of a door on our left. Cautiously, we slipped inside to investigate. We found a side chamber that might once have been a drawing room. Its walls were lined with half-burnt candles set on deserted hearths. There, stooped over a small table in the center of the room, stood an elderly woman dressed in tattered garments and wearing a porcelain mask shaped like a hound's face. She neither stirred nor acknowledged our entrance. So the man in the owl mask crept closer, clearing his throat. Her slender shoulders quivered slightly in response. "Are you alone?" he ventured. The old woman tilted her head, letting out a raspy chuckle. "We are never truly alone," she replied in a voice reminiscent of dry leaves. "I see you have chosen not to remove your masks. Wise children. The house grants one final courtesy to those who hold on to their illusions." My heart thudded. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she raised a shriveled hand decorated with a single garnet ring. Her trembling fingers rested upon a faded photograph on the table, showing a throng of men and women in old-fashioned attire. Each face bore traces of misery, or was it resignation? "This house," she began softly, "was once the seat of a prosperous family. They held midnight balls every harvest season, inviting all from far and wide. Here, joy was had, romances ignited, fortune squandered. But something took root in these walls, a sickness, a malignant regret. Now, those who step into the mansion bear witness to echoes of the past. They appear at the masquerade, dancing as if they still live. And perhaps, in some way, they do." She cast her eyes at us through dark hollows in the hound mask. The Almac man shot me a nervous glance, as if to confirm we were experiencing the same madness. "But they vanished when midnight struck," he said faintly. "Their masks, they removed them, and then, gone." A hollow sigh escaped the woman, the masquerade clinging to memory. Each day they hold a masquerade, longing to recall the life they once had. At midnight, the final illusions fall away, and they return to the gloom. The mansion itself claims them. It would have claimed you too had you removed your mask, but you remain on the edges of the dream, refusing to join fully. You have one chance to leave, if you can find it. I felt a sudden surge of resolve. This was no place for the living. Even the air pressed in with unbearable sadness. The older woman's words struck me like a warning. Only those who clung to their mask could survive. I asked her if she might guide us to an exit, but she merely shook her head. "My time to leave passed long ago," she lamented. "Go while you can." We did not linger. The Almac man and I slipped back into the corridor, hearts pounding. I made an effort to quell the swirling panic in my thoughts. In the distance I caught a glimpse of a faint light, perhaps another flicker of a torch. We crept toward it, each step an agony of suspense. The house groaned around us, as if resentful of our defiance. At a turn in the corridor, the path forked in two directions. From the left side came a whispery breeze, carrying with it the smell of damp autumn leaves. That was enough for me. I gestured for the owl-macked man to follow, and we moved down the left passage. A rotted side door appeared, and I tested the knob with trembling hands. It refused to yield at first, as though an unseen force pressed from the other side. Then it gave way with a hideous squeal. Beyond the threshold stretched a crumbling veranda, overlooking a weed-choked courtyard. The cold night air poured in, chilling my lungs, yet I felt a wave of relief so intense I nearly collapsed. Here was an exit, albeit precarious. The courtyard's walls were partially collapsed, and through a series of ruins we could see flashes of the iron gate beyond. The path to freedom would not be straightforward, but it was there. The owl-make man clapped me on the shoulder. "We're close," he whispered. "Let us hurry before the house changes its mind." We clambered down a half-broken flight of steps onto the overgrown flagstones of the courtyard. Around us stood the eerie remnants of statues, their features worn away by time, until only eyeless sockets stared at our passing. The hush persisted, with unsettling weight, as though the night itself awaited our next misstep. At the far end of the courtyard, I saw the rusted gate I had come through earlier, but as we drew near, I noticed something stirring in the gloom, a gathering of barely visible silhouettes. My throat tightened. They hovered just outside the gate, masks upon their faces, desperately searching for a way inside. Or perhaps they were searching for us. I moved forward, intending to pass them and unbar the gate. But the moment they noticed our presence, one stepped into our path, a tall figure wearing a deer mask with branching antler. In a tremulous hush, he spoke. "You have not yet joined the dance. Why do you flee?" "We are leaving," I said, my voice reflecting a courage I did not truly feel. "Your ball is finished. At midnight, everything, ... ended." A sorrowful murmur ran through the masked silhouettes. The deer-make figure raised a slender finger and tilted his head. "We yearned for the living to join us," he said, his tone laced with regret. "We can only exist in memory, in the hush of the night. Do you not feel the weight of your own regrets? The dance can ease them. If you yield, this place can become your home." The owl-maked man seized my arm. "He lies," he rasped, panicked. "We mustn't stay." He attempted to pull me away, but I felt an odd magnetism tugging at my spirit. A subtle temptation. All the sorrow and loneliness in my life seemed to gather at the edge of my thoughts, whispering that I could rest here, escape the burdens and heartbreak. But the recollection of those vanishings at midnight, the terror etched into their eyes, spurred me onward. I refused to remove my mask. I refused to become another phantom. With a surge of desperation, we pushed through the throng. Some of the figures reached out, their gloved hands grazing my coat sleeves. Their pleas were soft and plaintive, urging us to join them, yet none physically restrained us. Perhaps they lacked the power to do more than beg. Heart-hammering, I managed to catch the heavy iron gate and tug it open with a cry of exertion. Rust flaked off in choking clouds, but at last we forced it wide enough to slip through. And then we were out, staggering onto the leaf-strewn road, the silhouettes watching us silently from behind the bars. We did not pause. Adrenaline fueled our limbs as we left the estate behind, forging a path through the foggy darkness until our lungs burned with exertion. Only when we reached a place where the trees thinned and the moon glimmered above did we dare look back. The mansion's outline stood in the distance, half hidden behind twisted trunks. No lights glowed in its windows. No music drifted across the night. We heard only the whispers of wind through the branches. A wave of relief washed over me, and for the first time, I dared to slide my black half-make from my face. The owl-maked man stood beside me, equally hesitant. With trembling hands, he removed the owl piece, revealing a young man's visage, haggard and drenched in sweat. We held our breaths, half expecting to vanish as the others had, but the world remained solid beneath our feet. Fearful that the estate might still exert some hold on us, we continued down the road until we found a small lodge with a stable where we could rest. The stable master, an old fellow dozing by a lantern, jerked awake as we approached. He eyed us suspiciously when we recounted a tale of carriage trouble and the need for safe lodging. I offered money enough to silence further questions. That night, I lay awake on a narrow cot, listening to the owl-macked man's restless shuffling in the adjacent bed. Neither of us spoke. Attempts to form words seemed futile after what we had witnessed. When morning arrived, the sun's first rays brought little comfort. My dream was haunted by flickering images of graceful dancers, swirling in slow arcs under candlelit gloom, their eyes pleading from behind intricate masks. Even as I awakened, the hush seemed to linger in my ears. I realized with cold certainty that I had glimpsed something beyond the threshold of normal life, a realm between memory and oblivion, inhabited by those who refused to let go of what they once had. We parted ways later that day. The owl-macked man, his name was, Garrett, spoke little, Yet I sensed he wished to put the entire event behind him. Despite my exhaustion, a restless compulsion drove me to return to the city. I wanted to record what had transpired, to shape it into words, perhaps to prove it to myself. But how to begin? Who would believe that an invitation to a midnight masquerade led me into a decaying mansion where ghosts attempted to trap me in their eternal dance? Sometimes I wonder, months after I escaped, if the mansion still stands. Does it gather new guests each midnight, enticing them with illusions of grandeur? Perhaps the sorrowful souls remain, trapped in an unending cycle, forced to greet the living with outstretched hands. Occasional nightmares wake me drenched in sweat, haunted by the memory of their eyes, hopeful yet doomed as they removed their masks and disappeared. My own black mask now sits on a shelf, a silent reminder of that fateful night. I cannot bring myself to discard it. I recall the old woman's parting words, "Go, while you can." I have abided by her counsel, though full peace eludes me. Each midnight, I sense a faint stirring in the back of my mind, an echo of dusty violins beckoning me to join the dance once again. Even now, if I close my eyes in the hush of the witching hour, I can hear the subtle swish of sweeping gowns and the soft breathing of masked revelers. They wait among the shadows, yearning for someone to enter the realm they can no longer leave. And I pray, in my silent invocations to whatever listens in the darkness, that I will never again succumb to an invitation bearing a crest of a twin-headed raven, urging me to become part of their midnight masquerade, where the unmasking heralds a final, irreversible disappearance into the arms of that forsaken house.